so that's why I am starting the recording now. Also, actually, we will be streaming it on Facebook, so other participants can join us live there. As mentioned, my name is Ricarda Muchilnik. Welcome here to this webinar today. This webinar is organized by Bridge 47. Just a few words, who is Bridge 47? It's a European project. It's implemented by 15 European global civil society and global civil society organizations. And our aim is to empower global civil society to contribute to a transformation towards global justice, and doing this through global citizenship education. So we are having 4 different outcome areas. So we are trying to create a global network working towards global citizenship education. We do a lot of advocacy work to change policies. We are having a very strong partnership outcome area and a partnership network. And one of our aims is also to build the capacities, and in particular for global citizenship education practitioners. So what can you expect today? Today, our 2 kind speakers, Megan McHaney, who is the Bridge 47 Advocacy Coordinator, who you can see on the screen already, as well as our kind colleague Rosaria Kunda Marron. She's the Director of the Education and Development Solutions in Ireland. They will be introducing to you a framework for the monitoring of the progress towards reaching SDG 4.7. In particular, Rosaria will be presenting you recommendations about how 4.7 can be collected by using learning assessment models that can be also adapted to non-formal learning and adult education. And Megan will be leading a discussion on how the Bridge 47 network and its members can actually run pilots to test the framework's feasibility, probably in the upcoming months. So these are a few words of what we are gonna be doing in the next hour. And before we start, we're very curious to hear who is actually here. So I'm starting a very short poll now. We would like to know what are your experiences and your knowledge in measuring and monitoring SDGs. So you should be seeing a question now where you can respond. Yeah, I have quite a lot of experience. I have none experience at all, or a little bit. Has anybody? I don't see you voting yet. Maybe that's not. It's working. Lovely. There's also a second question. We are wondering what you actually expect from the webinar. So do you expect to gain a deeper knowledge on the tools of monitoring and measuring SDGs? Or do you like to get some new ideas, inspirations, especially for your work? Do you would like to receive basic knowledge and a first insight? Or are you just open and curious to learn something completely new what's completely new to you? Or you don't know. You don't know what to expect. I can see that you're voting, people are clicking. So, yes, I'm gonna give it another 30 seconds so you can respond to this poll. Please let us know, what are your experiences? We are hoping to meet your experiences, expectations of this webinar as well. So, I am closing the poll now, and I can see that, yeah, around 3 participants have a little bit of knowledge and experience in measuring and monitoring, and two times 2 have quite a lot of non-experiences at all. Expectations, yes, you're trying to get some new ideas and you're hoping to get some inspiration for your work. Some of you are, yeah, curious and open to learn something new. So thank you so much for participating in this poll. So we have some knowledge, yeah, who is here and what are your expectations? So, and then I am, yeah, handing over to Megan to give us a little bit of a background information why Bridge 47 has actually initiated the work on this framework. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ricardo. Thanks for the introduction and the poll, and it's good to hear where each of us are coming from, and that helps us try and get some information to you that will be useful and engaging. So my name is Megan McHaney. I'm the Advocacy Coordinator for the Bridge 47 project. And the background for this framework is that, as Ricardo said, Bridge 47 is a project that is funded by the European Union and or European Commission rather, and it works to build capacity for civil society organisations and those working on global citizenship education. And we have a global network. And in listening to our members of the network and listening to our consortium partners, and listening to the debates happening around 4.7, we learned that having data on measuring and evidence of SDG target 4.7 is important. And we learned that there's a significant gap in working that data out and collecting that data and making it useful. And we also heard and listened to partners and through our events that those working in non-formal or informal settings often had difficulty making their work translatable so that it was seen as important for local governments, national governments, or funding providers, or anyone else that they wanted to talk about why 4.7 was important. So in essence, this research series, which is 3 papers, and Rosario will go through them, is our contribution to the debate on 4.7 and collecting data on 4.7. And it's meant to be twofold. One, it's to, as I said, contribute to the discussions, outline why it's important to collect data on 4.7, and make the arguments for that, and to help civil society organisations and others make those arguments. And then secondly, it's a proposed framework for how we can collect data on 4.7, how we can evaluate and measure our work on 4.7, both informal and non-formal. So we want to use this tool, or we want to use this research as an advocacy tool to kind of persuade our national and local governments to use and collect data on 4.7, and we want to pilot and trial how this framework could work in the non-formal setting. So additionally to the framework that Rosario is going to go through, Bridge 47 is at the moment has a call open for subgranting projects. As part of that subgranting project, we are funding up to 4 pilots for this research, for this monitoring framework to be used rather. And I will type into the chat box which countries are eligible to apply for that subgranting. And the subgranting fund can be used to hire and pay consultants to run the framework on programs that you have done already. And really what we're looking for is to test the feasibility of the framework. So we're just looking to learn how valuable this framework is for civil society organizations to do. Any questions, I guess?
Thank you so much, Megan. Thanks. If this is okay, Megan, we will be collecting the questions in the chat box. So we will be having a Q&A after the inputs of Megan and Rosaria. So please note down the questions in the chat box. I will be collecting them, and we will be discussing them at the end of the presentations and the inputs. So thank you so much, Megan, for this background and further information. So also because this question might come up, we will be sharing the slides with you afterwards. You will be receiving them all via email after this webinar, as well as the recording. So then I would like to hand over to Rosaria, who will be telling us more about the research and the framework itself. Over to you, Rosaria.
Thanks, Ricardo. I'm trying to get out of your screen. Okay, yeah. Perfect.
I stopped sharing it, so.
Morning, everybody. I'll just go back there. So my name is Rosaria, and I'm part of a group of 3 women who works on this piece of work. It's a draft monitoring framework. My background is in education program planning, implementation, management, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa and a little bit in Asia and South America as well. More recently, I've focused a lot on monitoring and evaluation. We were commissioned to do this piece of work by Bridge 47. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just perfect.
Okay. Okay. And the technology and me sometimes don't work too well. Anyway, so this is the flow of how we went about doing this piece of work. It was mostly a document and literature review. We tried to triangulate a few articles, reports, working papers, and this culminated into a series of 3 white papers, if you may, which were divided into the first one looked at the characteristics of SDG targets 4.7. Another one looked at the use of learning assessment data globally. And then we looked at proposed framework and tools that we could use. So
Rosaria, sorry to interrupt you. Are you sharing your PowerPoint presentation? Do you want to show it to us? Because we can't see it.
Okay, I'm on the screen now. I thought you were all seeing my screen.
No.
Okay, how do I get out of this now?
Do you want me to share it because I have your slides?
Okay. Yes, perhaps. I thought I was. Okay.
Don't worry. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. I thought everyone was seeing it. Yeah.
No, now.
Yeah.
So you're as a methodology, yeah?
Yes, yes. So as I was saying, I said we did a basic document and literature review. And we got 3 white papers, one on characteristics of the SDG targets, one on use of the learning assessment data, and the final on the actual proposed framework and tools. So I'll give a summary of the major findings from each of the papers, and then talk about our key outcomes from each of those. Yeah. So the key outcome from the whole piece of work combined was that learning assessments are more generally used to monitor learning outcomes. I suppose they provide us with measurable information. And though it's equally important to get in the informal and non-formal sectors, unfortunately, this has mostly been done in the formal setting. We also found that indicators used don't often speak to local or specific context. And the tools don't generally consider local understandings of issues, local knowledge, and local attitudes. This was across data and literature from different researchers who had worked on the field as well. Go on to the characteristics now. What we found primarily was that this particular target provides learners with all the knowledge and competencies that they need to achieve all of the SDGs. So it's perhaps the enabler, if you may. And the tools to deliver that are used generally are global citizenship education and education for sustainable development based programs. We also found that it's a dichotomous target in that it has both outcomes and provisions, which is good because it's measuring two quite important aspects of an education program. And I suppose most interesting was the tension we found between universalism and cultural relativism. Universalism points to just human rights applying equally to all, whereas cultural relativism points to human rights being culturally dependent, excuse me there. And we found, I suppose, we generally lean towards the Western definition, which I suppose goes under the realm of universalism, which again provides a tension because being applied in different settings, the understanding of human rights is not always in that sense. And we also found non-recognition of non-formal space as key part of measuring progress to be a big factor. I don't think we came across much that was measuring in the non-formal sector. Move on to the learning framework. So generally, when you measure for provision, we found conventionally you would code for presence or absence of something. But I think the most important we found is that learning and learners are at the center of all education programs. And I suppose in a climate of climate change discussions and debates going on, perhaps we could argue that learning is our most renewable resource at the moment. And then it is the core driver and consistent thread that underpins all human development. And then we found when you look at learning and learners being at the center, they're influenced by context and practices. I suppose if you look vertically, you look at the systems or context in which it's taking place, and then horizontally, you look at practice in terms of how it's taking place. Now, we borrowed this from Wagner, but we found this very useful in just giving a visual representation of how learning takes place, where it takes place. So when you talk about measuring the learning outcomes, as mentioned earlier, it's generally focused on formal learning assessments. And I suppose there's a lot of evidence that points to large-scale assessments being assumed to be key ingredients for improved performance in education systems and learning achievements as well. But we felt that they do not consider local and cultural context, and they're not generally adaptable. So what we felt a monitoring framework should contain are the three key areas. It should be relevant, adaptable, and flexible. Now this, theoretically, we felt this was a good basis for any monitoring framework, and it is often not taken into consideration for various reasons. You look at the current indicators, that will perhaps maybe give a good example of how the monitoring framework leave out a lot of these key issues. Just at a glance, they're incomplete, pretty much fragmented. I think I know now the 4.7.5 has changed. I think they've changed the 15-year-old now. I'm not sure what it is now, whether there's an age group or something, but I mean, just at a glance, it's just totally incomplete and not adequate. And largely we put that down to a lack of clear definitions of what the global indicator is. If you look at that, it talks about global citizenship education, education for sustainable development, but the core of these are missing throughout all of these. I mean, when you look at what you should be measuring and what you're actually doing, this leaves out a lot of the stuff that is actually going on. And of course, these are still work in progress. And I think within the European Union, these are classified as tier 3 indicators. So they are work in progress, but just at a glance, they cannot give us any picture at all of where we are or what we're doing. So our key findings from when we look at the indicators and characteristics. Would you go on to the next slide, please? Yeah. It's just, I mean, definitions, understandings, they varied widely. Surprisingly, even within one country, understandings and definition of in the laws, in the policies, in the curriculum and assessments differed within those four, between them, among them, which doesn't, it doesn't give a good basis to develop an indicator or to even begin to measure a program adequately. And the indicators, of course, being varied, complex, fragmented, they just do not reflect any of the actual concepts within what we're doing. So from this now, we have 4 recommendations that we made, and we thought perhaps the local validity should be considered more, and where indicators could be developed from in a local environment, perhaps to take into account a lot of the definitions and understandings to make it more meaningful. And just in terms of strategically to leverage local level monitoring to make it to make tracking more useful. If people at the local level can understand it and find it more meaningful, it will be better. We'll get better insight and perhaps more accurate information. And as transformative education, GCE being transformative, the indicators needed to measure transformation at individual level, and not, I think individual level measurement is very important, because that is where the change or the transformation is taking place or happening. So indicators that we use need to speak to those levels. So against this backdrop, we are thinking a participatory framework where all groups recognize the importance and shared responsibility and are involved in the process, perhaps using a values-based approach. I mean, there'll probably be other approaches out there, but I think the key thing is to just involve everybody in the entire process. So from all of this, we proposed a framework that is, it's a knowledge, attitude, and practice survey. But before I go into that, I want to just look at the 5 key education variables that are perhaps that have been agreed upon through UNESCO. So the variables are learner characteristics, context, inputs, process, and outcomes. And these variables, of course, would help us then measure. These are what are involved in education and what would help us to measure any changes in learning outcome in a learning environment. So now to go into the actual proposed framework, we thought we could put global citizenship education into a conceptual sense, just to back it down by theory. So we try to theorize our thinking, and we put, I'll use the term competencies, but this is for lack of a better term. But whatever we need to measure, we thought should be assessed within 3 goals. Now, to come down to these 3, we looked at literature on proposed competencies for different assessments of ESD and global citizenship education. So ultimately, we built on the work of other researchers and included formal as well as non-formal spaces and informal spaces. And the focus was on the transformative aspect. So our proposed transformative competencies are knowledge, attitude, and practice as the framework in which we would measure this. Now, keeping in mind that the theory of change for global citizenship education or education for sustainable development is complex, it is long-term, it is perhaps non-linear. we needed to have a non-conventional approach to measuring the learning outcomes of these programs. And using a knowledge, attitude, and practice survey gives us, or it shows us the shift into a transformative paradigm. And to do this, we use the values-based approach to indicator development. Now, this is just a complete snapshot of the proposed framework. We have suggested a mixed methods approach where you use both quantitative and qualitative methods. And because it's a dichotomous target, for provision, we could basically code for presence or absence of key aspects. And these are generally collected already. You'd find a lot of them in EMIS data. You would find them in school surveys, protocols. These would be conventionally collected. But for the outcomes, I think this is where our work is not cut out. So we are suggesting to develop proto-indicators using a thematic template, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And we use a pre-test for a baseline audit, deliver the program, and then measure a post-test, again, of the same CAP study. So this could be done in two tiers. One as initially a snap survey, just to get contextual information. And you could probably get some of the provision data there as well in the snap survey. And that's our quantitative side. And then when you come to now the actual outcomes, we are proposing the use of case studies. And in here, case studies being different programs or projects that are delivering target 4.7. And this is where we will do a pre-test and a post-test. Data collection goes in the form of key informant interviews that similar, that's under perhaps the SNAP survey data, and then focus group discussions in the actual case studies. Analysis briefly then, the quantitative will propose SPSS. You could also use data, depending on what is preferable. And then qualitatively, we are proposing to use thematic template analysis, and then a cross-case synthesis. So the actual template is where you collect the data, you define the proto indicators, and you code for whatever you're getting, and then you do the pre-test and the post-test, and then you do a cross-case synthesis where you look at within a country, for instance, 3 or 4 or whatever number of different case studies that you did, and you combine this information and report back at national level where you're reporting on the 3 proposed competencies. I'm using the term competencies as well very cautiously here because it's perhaps not exactly the right term. So I apologize again for the it's a lot of data and it's word heavy. So this here gives you the full proposed framework. It shows you the context indicators. Now we proposed a few just as a starting point, but of course this is all subject to change and approval later on. So you see in our context indicators, we could code for the presence of concepts of global citizenship, depending on what is understood about these concepts in the local context that we're working in. Its presence in teacher education curriculum, in the actual delivery curriculum, and in student assessments. And then the input indicators, again, you're going to code for presence or absence of materials, resources, in the classrooms, the teachers trained, etc. Process indicators, again, we're getting what an enabling environment is. Again, this would vary widely, and data should generally be easily available because you'll be looking here at what is in the laws and what is in the curriculums and the assessment systems and things like that. Now, on the outcome indicators, when you start by developing a template. Now, this template you will work with, so it's two-pronged. You are developing it as you go, but as you collect data, you might need to work backwards as well and redevelop the themes and codes that you have. So initially, you develop the a priori themes, which provide kind of the proto indicators, kind of like a prototype. So this is just something that is a general concept. And then what you will do then is, when you have the focus group discussions, you will transcribe the interviews, get shared meanings, understandings of the concepts that they have. And the strength of using the focus groups is that when people discuss in a group, you get a more general sense of what is understood, not by one individual, but by the community or the group. And I suppose here the trick is to get the right people in the focus groups who are representative of the community in which this particular project or activity is taking place. And then you will flow through the next stage of the indicators. As you code, you will see themes that are constantly coming up, and you will use these as your actual codes within the categories that you will be using. And this gives you an initial template that will then have the themes and the categories, and then the codes will come in when you transcribe all the interviews and they're inputted into this. I know this all sounds a little bit hairy-fairy, but maybe once you see the actual template, it looks a little bit easier. And when you get the final findings, you use kind of cross-case synthesis to make assertions, links, and draw conclusions within the matrix. Just to make this a little bit more visually representative, I might show you the drafts, what do you call it? The template, a sample of the template that I can have. It's in a Word document, Ricardo. I'm
trying to show it.
See it here. Okay.
Second. Okay.
Yes, there you go. So this is what the template would look like initially. Would you just put it up a little bit, please? Yes, thank you. So we have our cluster competencies or themes, which we divide into knowledge, attitude, and practice from the conceptual framework of the programs. And then the categories or proto indicators are what you will develop with people, with those actors who are actually delivering these programs. So these will be perhaps players in the CSOs or NGOs that do program delivery. With them, you agree and find, kind of get general idea from what the work that they're doing, on what categories they have, what they're doing. So just for as examples, we have here acquire tools for under knowledge, acquire tools for understanding the world, understand concepts and issues. Attitude, we have there cooperating with people, celebrating diversity, etc. And then from these, now you go and you develop indicator codes. This now is coming from the focus group discussions that you are having, from what is coming out. Let's say, for example, people now say they're voting more. They never used to vote before, and now they can vote. So we could say, though, that's a change in the practice. So apply learned knowledge in daily life. They are voting more now, perhaps now that they're more educated about the importance of being an active citizenship. So as an indicator code there, we can say participation in local elections as one of our codes. Keeping in mind again that from the discussions, there will be things that would come up that may not be in our proto indicator categories. And we may need to then create another one to accommodate whatever is coming out of the discussions. And similarly, there would be some that we would have developed as categories that do not come out at all and may not seem important, and we will then just remove it from the list of our perhaps suggested proto indicators. So this is a two-way process. And at the end of it all, when we have a full template, what we're reporting on, for instance, is perhaps increased levels of knowledge or decreased levels of knowledge in ESD and GCE, or change in attitude, change in practice. And so when you're reporting at national level, we are proposing that you report against these clusters of competencies. And the categories and indicator codes are all feeding into those three, we'll probably need to find a word for it, or the transformative competencies, or something along those lines. So basically that's, and I know and understand it's very difficult to get your head around this because it's very heavy. And we might need a little bit of time to get the head around it. But in a nutshell, this is pretty much what we are proposing as a good starting point. Yeah, I think that's pretty much, unless there's any questions now.
And perhaps I could just add a bit there that what Rosaria was saying about the proto indicators and the stuff coming out of the focus groups, that's kind of tailored to your specific area. Yes. So the idea is that this framework can be flexible to any environment that civil society organizations, that any education provider finds itself doing 4.7, but yes, that we need a kind of overall understanding in order to report back to national governments, because we want to create the importance of 4.7, the kind of momentum, I guess, behind governments thinking that this is an important thing. Not only is it important, it's nice, but it's so important that unless we change our attitudes, our behavior, our knowledge, we won't actually achieve a sustainable world as outlined in this Sustainable Development Goals agenda. Yeah. So we're kind of, those are the three themes, the kind of cluster competencies that we might change the wording of, but ideally that's already the language that anyone who is doing any measuring on the SDGs is using. And so then we're creating this framework that is transferable to your local context or your national context, but in a way that allows the flexibility for what you're doing, but still uses the language that governments and providers are using for the SDG measurement already.
Yes, and I think key as well for this is the transformative aspect of it. We want to show change, and this is where we link with all, the importance of this particular target to all the other SDGs. If we're changing our attitudes and practices and our knowledge, it means that achievement or movement towards the other SDGs, we can measure progress much easier at citizenship level. It shows some form of level of change within active citizenships, if you may, which is, I think, very important, especially in the non-formal and informal lifelong learning sector, which is often left out in national and regional global learning assessments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Rosaria. I'm already picking up on questions in the chat box. I'm starting with the question from Cecilia. Cecilia asks, Rosaria, you're talking about data collection in formal education or in non-formal education. Is it global citizenship education globally or based on regions? So this proposal is for governments or for civil society?
Okay. Well, I think we're talking about data collection in all environments, I think, and that's the strength we feel of our proposal, in that it can be used in both the formal sector, it can be used in the non-formal sector, and in the informal sector. It can be used anywhere where learning is taking place around global citizenship education or education for sustainable development based programs. You will actually find, like for instance in Ireland, a lot of these programs are based within the formal school setting, even though they're not part of the examinable subjects, if you may. So it takes place within a formal school setting. But the crux of the matter, I think, is that it is the global citizenship education or sustainable development that you're measuring. And I think this proposal, well, initially it would be for civil society to bring up to the fore, to advocate more for governments at national level. I mean, if this works out, I do not see why it can't go up even higher than for governments. I think the most important thing is that we measure what is being done, because there's work being carried out, we're not measuring it. So progress is not we don't know what progress we're making, and then it's the importance and the difference that it's making is not being seen. So I suppose it's for everyone, I suppose, to be active citizenships, if you may.
And I can just add to that from Bridge 47, we've already used this proposed framework to essentially lobby that the Eurostats that holds all of the information that for Europe around how it's doing with the Sustainable Development Goals to include an indicator for SDG 4.7. Currently, it doesn't have an indicator at all. There is no mandate from the European governments, institutions for member states to collect data on 4.7. So we've already gone and participated in a working group meeting and presented our framework as a possibility for how 4.7 can be gathered and measured to take into consideration. So while we wouldn't think that this is a framework, or it could be a framework that governments use, primarily at the moment we're proposing that civil societies try it out and see if it is applicable in their situations. But we are using it as an advocacy tool already.
Thank you. I hope, Cecilia, your question was answered, and the responses Rosaria and Megan have been giving now connects to the question of Anya Nielsen. She asks, so the framework is intended as both an M&E and advocacy tool?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. Okay. I think that was a very clear answer.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, I maybe just, I don't want to just echo the same words over and over, but yes, I think when you have something that this is a proposed M&E tool. So initially we're going to use it to advocate for inclusion of indicators, because they're not there, or the ones that are the indicators that are there are fragmented. So we need to have a robust tool that gives us concrete results that we can then use to advocate, because they would be solid, grounded in theory. You know, the scientists and academicians love theoretically grounded stuff. So they will be strong enough, you know, to be used as advocacy tools. It goes both ways. Again, a strong M&E is strong advocacy. You get results, you know, it shows where you're going. More funding or less funding, very dependent on M&E.
Thanks a lot. The next question, and also inviting others, please type in your thoughts, ideas, questions in the chat box. The next question comes from Stefano Rossi. He asks you, Rosaria, that you're using the word competence quite cautiously because it might not be the most appropriate term. So can you elaborate on this concern? What terms would you use on its behalf?
Yes. So just when you look at what competencies are in school or national assessments in the education management information systems, in you know, in the education delivery sector for actual educationists, teachers, lecturers, I think what they regard as competencies may be a little bit more narrow than what we have here as knowledge, attitude, and practice. For example, I had critical thinking there as a theme under knowledge as a competency. But some educationalists or researchers would argue that critical thinking is not a competency, or knowledge is not a competency. So unfortunately, at this point, I'm not sure what word would be best. But I think what we're trying to capture is the transformative aspect of maybe a skill. I can't find the word. I keep going back to competencies, but a transformative competency. Yeah, I feel it's not really the most appropriate term because of the way competency is used in other assessment tools. So yeah, we might need to look at that a little bit more. I don't know if you were there, Stefano, for the at the conference and in the group that looked at competencies, you know, the discussions that came out again. They just showed a little bit of, there wasn't much surety on or clarity on what exactly the competencies that we should be using are, because people's understandings again vary, what people think they should be and could be. Hence my reluctance to use it as is. I would use transformative competency broadly or happily, but wary of the fact, or cognizant of the fact that other players in the field use and understand the word competencies a little bit differently. So I mean, it's something I could probably look on and should look on. It didn't come to my attention until I had discussions after the conference with a few different people and heard what was being discussed. That actually it might not be the right term, because when you say competencies, people think of something different. So it's always about what you understand by the term, but the general idea is that we want to measure knowledge, attitude, and practice. Yeah. I hope that kind of gives you something to work with, Stefan.
Yes, he already acknowledged and
yeah, okay.
understood it better now. Megan, you wanted to add?
I just wanted to add as well that some of the the global actors, such as the OECD, which talks about global competencies for the 21st century. So there's a dialogue, or there's a theory of thought that is that competencies are based on skills that are for employment and for the labour market, and that often in competency-based education programs, it's about gaining competencies that then allow for a labour market entry, or to participate in the labour market more actively. And Bridge 47 doesn't believe in that. We believe in lifelong learning for the purposes of learning and bettering ourselves and society. So we are straying away from that labour market competency direction. And so I guess it's just an acknowledgement that these discussions are happening globally, regionally, and nationally, but we haven't yet found the right term to describe the kind of things that we're advocating for. So we're having to use language that isn't perfect, but it's the language we've got at the moment.
Difficulties to finding the right terms. I completely understand you there. So we have another 5 minutes before we end, and I have 2 more questions for you. So if others have burning questions, so type them in right now. So Cecilia asks, we have Pear who asks, as I understand, it is a tool to show impact of specific programs rather than to show differences between different programs. Is it more to show impact at all than efficiency of programs?
Yeah, I think this is more to show impact. It's to show what results of what we're doing. And again, we're saying you're going to compare these transformative competencies, and you are using what you are using to measure that, or to measure the impact, is the specific understandings of local context. So you're not using a an umbrella term, which runs the risk of missing out, because of missing out what different countries or sections or communities are doing. They could be doing the same thing, but they could understand it differently. So by using local contextual information to report on the 3 transformative competencies, we are getting the impact and not missing anything out, by taking into consideration local and cultural contexts, if that makes any sense. So it's more impact rather than efficiency of different programs.
Thanks, Rosaria. I'm sure, I hope you answered Pear's question.
I hope so.
I'm sure clearer now. So Cecilia, she's asking, SDG measurement is overall a government responsibility. Government should take the initiative and collect all available data and assessment in each country. Has there been a coordination with national governments on this? I know there are national evaluations of SDG groups. There are groups existing in many countries. And do you think it would be useful to connect with these groups?
Oh, it would be absolutely useful. I mean, remembering, I suppose most of us have democratic systems where it's a government of the people, for the people, by the people. So we are the government. It is our responsibility to collect this data. I mean, of course, governments have the mediums through which they collect it and report it nationally, regionally. But ultimately, we need to be the people who are getting the data. If we're the ones working on it, I think it's our responsibility to advocate and show the difference that we're making, the change that we are making. So absolutely, yes, we should connect with whatever groups are there. And like mentioned in my earlier, when I talked of the context indicators, the inputs, a lot of that information is already there in the Education Management Information System, the EMIS. And once we have these indicators, they could, I mean, EMIS is basically a platform through which governments reports any education data. We can advocate, once we have these advocated and agreed upon, these can be fed into the EMIS and reported nationally. So we're very linked. We are the government. We need to be the active people to help push this and use government as a medium through which our change is being projected and perhaps broadly disseminated to everybody. Absolutely, yes, we should connect.
I strongly agree with you there, Rosaria. So we have a final question by Catherine. Catherine asks, how can SDG 4.7 be effectively implemented into further education curricula, especially in BTECs? BTECs are formal education qualifications in the UK, what I just learned. So how can this be effectively implemented in further education curricula?
Well, I suppose it depends a lot on different countries and how they work. I'll give an example of Ireland because I feel, again, they have two, which I think are flagship programs in GCE and ESD. So they have the Worldwide Schools program and the one done by an organization called SUAS. The Worldwide School program is based within probably what would be secondary education. I know it's a little bit not exactly in the BTECs, but it is based within there. So each school works towards what they call a passport, a worldwide passport. So they have program which is perhaps outside the formal learning that they have, but it is there as an maybe extracurricular or co-curricular activity. You have these global citizenship classes or projects going on, and you collect points as you go. So, that is one example of how they do it. So it's something that is easily transferable into, I'd say, into any system. What would be interesting would be perhaps to try our framework and see how it works, how it would, if there's any differences when you measure within systems that are doing it informally outside the education system and those that are doing it in the education system. But I think there's always room to put that, depending on how curriculums are, how the setups are. There's no reason why it can't be included.
Maybe,
but then again, Ricardo and Megan, you might be in a better position to to answer that, since this is your forte.
I was only going to answer because I'm based in the UK, and so I have a bit of experience across the UK, and I think it's important to remember that in the UK there are different education systems in each of the 4 nations, because education has devolved to the national governments of Scotland, Wales, England, and Northern Ireland. So it's I think that's one thing to mention. And I'm based in Scotland, so for 4.7 in Scotland and further education, we would really be looking at how the post-16 education curricula was feeding into each other, and looking at all the legislation in Scotland. And we now have a Vision 2030 plus strategy, which I think would cover some of that. I don't know how it is in England, but I think the best people to talk to is Oxfam GB, and they could tell you about some of the further education. If you're really interested, you can email me directly and I can send you the contact details for persons to be in touch with if you want to explore it further.
Thank you so much. We have a final question, which is related to Wikimedia, the Wikimedia movement. I just Googled it. I don't know if you, Rosaria or Megan, are aware of that. So what would be the connection of the framework, the monitoring measuring framework, and the Wikimedia movement? Wikimedia movement looks into open knowledge, so knowledge as a service. So this is a platform that serves open knowledge to the world across interfaces and communities. And it's about knowledge equity. So a social movement which focuses on efforts on the knowledge and communities that have been left out by structures of power and privilege. So this was a question coming up from the participants as well.
Yeah, I'd never come across it before until now.
Yeah.
It looks interesting, and it looks like it's the right thing for us to be looking at, isn't it? At a glance, anyway. Yeah, no, I've never come across it, and thanks for the pointer, Stefan. I think I'll have a look and see what's there.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thanks to all participants. Thanks to, okay, no, we have lots of words of thanks here. So I'm very, very grateful for Rosaria and Megan taking the time to sharing their expertise and the knowledge here today. We are very much looking forward to your feedback. So I am posting a link. I'm trying to post a link into the chat box right now. Please, we are very much looking forward to hear what you thought of this webinar, and we are looking forward to your suggestions for improvement. And also, I would like to mention that we are having our next webinar on the 11th of December, where we will be talking about partnerships and how partnerships in global citizenship education can look like, also beyond civil society, the civil society organizations. So yes, please have a look on the Bridge 47 website, social media channels, subscribe to our newsletter. So thanks so much to all of you for being here today, and yes, sharing your ideas, thoughts, and knowledge. And big thanks to Rosaria and Megan.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Have a good day. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.